Let's turn now to Kyle Seraphin. He's a former FBI agent. He's the host of the Kyle Seraphin Podcast, and he joins us on the phone. Hello, Kyle. Great to have you back with us, sir.
Thanks for having me back on, Vince. Good to be here.
What do you make of Christopher Wray's testimony? What stands out to you?
Chris Wray has one of two options, and probably both of them are true. Either he's lying, he's massively incompetent, or a combination of both, depending on the question. That was my big takeaway. He said things that we know are false, so the question is, why are they false? And we just have to guess. We have to speculate that he's probably uninformed about some things, as he likes to claim that he's bubble wrapped, that he doesn't have visibility to certain things, that he has oversight of the FBI, but he doesn't lead the FBI. Those are kind of his words. I'm kind of parlaying that he doesn't lead part of it, but he did say that he has oversight only when he was talking to Brett Baier on Fox. So I don't know. It's really troubling. Like an FBI director who doesn't want to be transparent feels like his the oversight authority of Congress is actually never going to do anything. And, you know, he might be right, because so far we haven't seen any concrete actions that have changed his life or his story arc at all.
Let me give you an example of something where he asserted something that appears to be flatly untrue. Yesterday, Congressman Kevin Kiley asked Christopher Wray about the FBI's involvement in targeting parents at Merrick Garland's direction.
Do you believe that the Attorney General should apologize to parents who are the subject of that memorandum?
I'm not going to speak to that.
Will you apologize for the FBI's own role?
I think the FBI conducted itself the way it should here, which is that we've continued to follow our longstanding rules and have not changed anything in response to that memo.
And then we hear from people like FBI whistleblower Steve Friend that actually he was assigned to monitor school board meetings. He was sitting in parking lots writing down license plate numbers of parents who were attending those meetings, as Christopher Wray seemed to suggest that they weren't doing things like that.
100% correct. Yeah, and given the chance to trust what Chris Wray says versus Stephen Friend, I've seen Chris Wray say things that are either false or are incomplete, and I don't have that experience with Steve Friend, so that's really easy for me when it comes to the testimony. You know, the other thing is this. Should Merrick Garland apologize? I don't really care. Should he be impeached? Probably, for perjury, because he stated he wasn't going to be using counterterrorism resources, that he wouldn't be using Patriot Act tools to go after parents, and then I reported that seemed like a problem, since the FBI's counterterrorism director is the one who actually instituted that threat tag that we're familiar with now. And then add to the top of it that my buddy Garrett O'Boyle went public and shared that there were at least 23 investigations into parents using that threat tag, which is like a hashtag. It tags the information. He went public and brought that to Jim Jordan's office. So we know at the time that he was removed, there were at least 23 investigations that show that this is false. That's really troubling stuff. And if we're not going to act like a country that has laws, then we're just going to accept, I guess, this police state that we're sort of living in, where the FBI director says what he wants, and so does the Attorney General.
Chris Wray seemed to suggest yesterday, and even emphasize, that he wasn't consulted ahead of Merrick Garland's decision to send out that memo. He says he urgently then, as soon as the memo came out, he says he urgently contacted the 56 field offices across the FBI to alert them that they need to abide by the Constitution, that they can't be in the realm of criminalizing free speech. Why would an FBI director have to tell field offices that they need to abide by the Constitution?
It's CYA. It's pretty classic government stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, the FBI puts this caveat that says, remember, the FBI doesn't investigate First Amendment protected activities. They put it on everything they do when they're actually going to be investigating First Amendment protected activities. So what do you do with that? I mean, the guy says one thing, he has plausible deniability. This is sort of the MO, but I don't have any faith in what he says, because he's either said things that are false or that he doesn't know what's going on within his own agency, either of which are significant problems.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter which one it is, to be honest with you. Like I said, it could be both.
There's also the censorship of the American public. We now have mountains of evidence that the FBI in particular, and certainly other government agencies, have been involved in soliciting censorship from big tech companies and then receiving it on a routine basis. It's an assembly line of censorship between the government and these big corporations. Yesterday, Christopher Wray kept on emphasizing, well, this is just a normal partnership. This is exactly what happens all the time. We're being very responsible. Give us your perspective, Kyle Seraphin, on this relationship between government, big tech, and the First Amendment.
So I know people have called it the censorship industrial complex. I like to refer to it sort of as the information industrial complex. You're taking people from the intelligence community who deal in information, that's their sort of stock and trade, and they're leaving government service where all the contracts are, and they're going to the private sector where all the money is. That's pretty much what's going on. We are seeing back and forth. There are a number of people. There are Twitter threads about this. There are people like Tracy Beans reporting on it. There's people like Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi. And I actually just got to see them today at Freedom Fest. And these guys are doing, really important work showing that this has been going on for a while. And it's not, you don't pay these people to come in and work at Twitter because they are the best at doing what they do. You pay them because they know where the contracts are being signed on the back end by the federal government, which is an awful lot of money. And why wouldn't it be like that? That's the way it works in every other industry. I mean, there is censorship. There's no doubt about it. There's been wink and nod meetings that have been going on between the FBI and big tech. I have friends who have explained to me on multiple occasions they have been in these things with companies like Google and Reddit and Facebook and so on. So they are happening in the back end, and they say things in this sort of like tongue-in-cheek way. It's like, well, we can't censor anybody, but you're a private company, elbow, elbow, nudge, nudge, and then they do. And so that we've seen the real world examples of this. Yes. And of course, now with the Twitter files and stuff, we see at least one example from a private company.
Now, I mean, as I understand it, or at least the way I was raised and I learned about the way the government interacts with the people, the government can't inflict punitive actions upon you unless due process is afforded to you and you are innocent until proven guilty. But instead, what seems to be happening here is the FBI is targeting various social media accounts and shutting down their ability to communicate without any sort of meaningful investigation or trial into whether or not those accounts had committed wrongdoing in the first place.
Well, they're trying to privately enforce terms of service that exist for a private company that have nothing to do with the federal government's interests. So that's a notable problem. If the FBI is flagging TOS type issues, I would be very concerned about that, because why are we spending federal dollars to enforce private rules? That's a big issue. But the second thing is people need to understand that some of the case law, and I think probably some of the actual the statute, has not really caught up to the technology as it exists right now. We have contractors that will go out there, forecast what they think the government might want or other companies might want, and they will gather information, whether it be from social media and so on. They will do exploitations of this, and they will offer it and sell it. Well, the government can come in and buy it. What the government could not get without a search warrant, they can actually now buy because it's available to the public. Now, most people could probably not afford it. But if that's the case, we have a situation where I don't think our laws are actually, or at least our decisions are being kept up with. And most of the people that are being violated by this stuff don't have the money to go out and legislate, or rather litigate it in a way that's going to get us case law that protects it. So yes. I don't know if you want Congress stepping up or what the answer is, but at some point in time, we're going to have to come to grips that technology moves faster than the law almost all the time.
Yeah, and there's a First Amendment, and regardless of what the technology looks like, it should be upheld. You've got let me just ask you, from your perspective as an FBI agent, when an FBI official, an agent, whoever, asks for something out of, say, a corporation or somebody who's in private industry, how intimidating is that to that person that they're interacting with an FBI agent? It's got to be pretty coercive to just have a request of that nature.
Generally, I would say yes. That actually probably works closer on the private citizen level. If I go knock on your house, those 3 letters, obviously now I'm a former or recovering FBI agent, but if you were to go knock on the house and you have those 3 letters across your chest, then that is in fact a very intimidating thing. And I think there is some coercion to it, simply just by nature of what the agency is and what it might mean for your future. That being said, most corporations historically have pushed back. They've been able to hold the line, and there's been a respect there. I think of instances where if we did not keep the documentation up on our national security letters, which are like secret subpoenas for national security cases, then they would in fact share that information with the client, because you would assume that a bank and a phone company and an internet company would look at their clients as being the people that they have, if not a fiduciary duty, at least a responsibility towards, because that's where they're generating their income and that's what their product is all about. But more and more, what I think we're seeing is some voluntary basis, and you're probably leading on to what happened with Bank of America. If the FBI said it, didn't produce any paperwork, and they came towards it, was it under this wink and nod policy? Was it because there was an ideology that was being supported by that private entity? That's also kind of concerning. But generally speaking, historically, you didn't have businesses cooperate because they just said, go get a subpoena. It's very easy to do. Get a search warrant if you need to. And then almost all of them have a portal to be able to access that stuff and send it on. They have a streamlined process because they're businesses. They're not the federal government. They actually do things efficiently.
Can I? Your name came up yesterday in the hearing, Kyle Seraphin, and I want to make sure to give you a chance to address it. I'm gonna play a clip first. This is the Democrat Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and let you respond to it if that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
All right. Here's Sheila Jackson Lee yesterday.
I have a document that is a tweet that is wanting to submit into the record. 2 of the Republican witnesses were gifted 255,000 checks, 255,000 in checks immediately after they testified before this committee. It seems to be quid pro quo, But the fact of the tweet that I'm submitting from Mr. Kyle Seraphin says the fact that Mr. Allen has not yet cashed a check is not that he did not receive the check. So I submit in the record the tweet from Mr. Seraphin, who indicated that two gentlemen, Garrett and Marcus, were receiving a check of
continue your attack on whistleblowers without objection. Though,
can you explain, Kyle Seraphin, what's happening here for the rest of us?
Sure. Well, first of all, Sheila Jackson Lee is mispronouncing my name, which I'm sure is probably complicated to get the PH. It sounds like an F when you read it in English. My 4-year-old figured that out, but my 6-year-old, she's on the page. So anyway, she's got that trouble. She's kind of struggling there, but essentially she is saying in the least articulate way possible that I wrote a check to two men because I had a give, send, go that I opened up for Marcus Allen and for Garrett O'Boyle, who one is a former SOS in the FBI and the other is a former FBI agent. They're both indefinitely suspended. So I use that term former because that's what I think is going to happen to them. But the FBI considers them employees despite not paying them in over a year. So I went out on Give, Send, Go, and I created an account, and we publicized it, and we got some pretty good traction. And we had about 11,000 people in America open up their hearts and their wallets, and they, donations as small as $2, and the highest one was $5,000 for what it's worth. Not very many of those. We raised about $560,000 for these gentlemen and their families, so that they can continue to, keep the lights on and eat. Chris Wray was actually asked yesterday, how would you do if you didn't get a paycheck for 10 months? And he kind of laughed at it, which I think tells you a lot. No sense of empathy from that man. But what Sheila Jackson Lee is accusing me of, apparently, is buying testimony for these guys because I raised money for two people, one of whom I've never met. I've never met Marcus, but he seems like a good guy. And Garrett is a dear friend. And I want them to not starve, and I want their children to not starve because I think what the government has done to them is wrong because the government did the same thing to me, and it wasn't very fun for me. So that's what's going on. I wrote those checks. They did, in fact, tear them up because we had some tax liabilities if they actually cashed them. And we're actually in the process. I've got a lawyer doing it. We're making a 501c4 so that we can write them checks, so I'm not going to be on the hook for a 35% penalty or whatever the heck it is to pay the federal government taxes for money that they have no right to take.
So the money,
that's what's going on.
So you are still technically, I would assume, in control of the money for now.
It's all in my bank account. Yes, it is.
Okay, and so these guys never actually received any of it. The way the Democrats were talking about it yesterday, though, Kyle Seraphin, I have to believe that they're desperate to come after that cash.
Maybe so. Yeah, I don't think there's going to be any possibility that they can really do anything with it. I guess they could come seize my bank account, but then they would have to admit that I didn't pay it to those guys yet. And so that would be problematic for what she said. Here's the thing. People keep asking me if I'm going to go testify in front of Congress. And the answer is probably no. I don't really have a lot of interest in doing so. But if I do, the condition is going to be really simple. I'm more than happy to swear in and testify under oath in front of these committees as long as the representatives do the same. If I'm going to be under penalty of perjury, I'd like to see that they are also under penalty of perjury so we don't have all these false statements out there. And if they agree to it, then I'd be more than happy to come and set the record straight for them. I just don't think they have the courage of their conviction to do so.
All right. Kyle Seraphin, former FBI agent, also host of the Kyle Seraphin Podcast. Thanks as always, Kyle. Good to talk to you today, sir.